What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. This offseason, I analyzed the results of over 2 million redraft teams over the last couple seasons to try and answer some questions about draft strategy. Today, we're going to take a look at what the study found championship teams did most often in full PPR leagues. Friday, we'll take a look at half PPR leagues. If you want to look into the data yourself, an extremely easy to use app that shows you when it's optimal to draft each position based on scoring format. You can do that on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. One note for this: whenever I say format in this video, we are still always talking about full PPR. Format here means like 2 wide receiver, 3 wide receiver, 1 flex spot, 2 flex spot, and none of this is super flex. Don't have enough data yet to do super flex. Next offseason, we'll add that in. So again, format here, when I say depending on format, we're still talking about PPR for this video. It's just how many wide receivers, how many flex spots. So we're going to start off with the wide receiver position. Our first takeaway is when drafting your first wide receiver, unless you have multiple flex spots, it is optimal to draft your first wide receiver in round 1. If you have 2 flex spots, then it's okay to do so in either round 1 or round 2. And this should make sense to us. I think you get a full point for every single reception. The position that benefits the most from this is obviously the wide receiver position. Sure, some of the high-end tight ends obviously benefit, but especially this season, there really is no tight end that should be going in round 1 or round 2 unless it's tight end premium. The high-end running backs benefit, but realistically, even the high-end running backs are not getting as many receptions as the highest-end wide receivers, so wide receiver benefits the most. It just becomes much more important, to attack these wide receivers early, not only for your weekly floor, right? Because you want to have a good baseline in every single week for how many points you're scoring at worst, but also your ceiling, right? Having access to wide receivers that are capable of racking up 8, 9, 10 receptions in a given week is obviously going to really elevate your ceiling. We also know that you're far more likely to use a wide receiver in the flex spot in this format. And so it's okay to be a little bit thinner at running back since it's a little bit more likely that you're only starting 2 of them each week. With your second wide receiver, flex spot no longer really matters that much. It actually comes down to how many wide receiver specific spots you had. So in a 2 wide receiver format, whether it's 1 flex spot or 2 flex spots, your second wide receiver should come anywhere from rounds 2 through 5. You have a little bit of flexibility there. In a 3 wide receiver format, has to come in rounds 2 through 4. Again, this should make a lot of sense to us. If you start 3 wide receivers, you have a 3 wide receiver only positions, or for this, honestly, wide receiver / tight end, that is wide receiver, right? You're never starting a tight end if it's wide receiver / tight end, so consider that a wide receiver spot. Maybe make it a little bit less valuable, but it's a wide receiver spot for all intents and purposes. If you're starting 3 wide receivers each week, you're going to need more high-end wide receivers. You can't afford to push it off as long, so the latest it should come if your second wide receiver is in round 4. If you're only starting 2, though, it would be fine to take a wide receiver in round 1, spend rounds 2, 3, 4 kind of attacking running back, quarterback, tight end before returning in round 5. Round 5, again, I just want to be clear, that is the last optimal round, so you could still wait until round 6, but for everything in this video, optimal meaning like if you want to increase your chance of winning a championship, you want to do so in rounds 2 through 5. You can wait until round 6, you just decrease your chance of winning, which obviously we don't want to do. The big question here is, what do we do kind of for the rest of them? So that, I think, makes a lot of sense to people. You can take a wide receiver in round 1. You probably should in full PPR. And then you kind of do so for your second wide receiver in the next couple rounds. But what about your wide receiver 3? What about your wide receiver 4? Does that change if you have a flex spot? If we're drafting our first bench wide receiver before other players? And as you should be able to figure out, format obviously matters for a lot of that. So in a traditional format, which is 2 wide receiver, 1 flex spot, your third wide receiver should come anywhere from rounds 3 through 8. You have a pretty big window there, and it is okay to draft 3 wide receivers in a row. Your fourth wide receiver should come anywhere from rounds 5 through 10. Again, a pretty big window there, and indicating that what I think everyone knows, in a format where you cannot start 4 wide receivers, you probably should not draft 4 wide receivers in a row in the first 4 rounds. As you add in flex spots, and especially starting wide receiver spots, the answer does change. In a 2 flex league, so 2 wide receivers, 2 flex spots, your third wide receiver changes from rounds 3 through 8 to now rounds 3 through 6, and your fourth wide receiver changes from 5 through 10 to rounds 4 through 10. So not too big of a shift, but you just can't wait as long for that third wide receiver. And then it does open the door to a 4 wide receiver start in the 2 flex leagues because you are allowed to start all 4. You don't want to draft your first bench wide receiver before drafting any other players. In a 3 wide receiver, 1 flex league, that third wide receiver changes from, again, rounds 3 through 8 in 2 wide receiver leagues to round 3 through 6. And then that fourth wide receiver changes from 5 through 10 to 4 through 9. So that means if we're looking kind of comparing 3 wide receiver to a 2 flex league, they are very similar. Again, a 3 wide receiver, 1 flex league, extraordinarily similar for the wide receiver position. For 2 running back, 2 flex leagues should kind of make sense. We've got these extra flex spots, but we're probably going to use wide receiver in them anyways. So the overall difference isn't there too much. The only big difference is how long you can wait for those first 4 wide receivers. In a 2 flex league, you can wait about a round later because you have a little bit more flexibility, not needing to start 3 wide receivers. Even if it's probably what you want to do, you don't have to. You could theoretically start 4 running backs and your team would still be fine if that's like what came to you in the draft value-wise. You just have a little bit more flexibility in leagues with more flex spots. That makes sense. Last wide receiver takeaway we'll go over today is your 5th wide receiver, and this is where format makes all the difference. Across all formats, your 5th wide receiver should come no later than round 12. So you should be looking at round 12 as the last time where you want to be drafting your 5th wide receiver, meaning if you're in rounds 13, 14, 15, and you don't have a 5th wide receiver yet, you better get on that, right? You should be having 5 wide receivers by that point. But in a 3 wide receiver format, it can come as early as round 5. So you are allowed to start off 5 consecutive wide receivers in a 3 wide receiver, 1 flex format. In a 2 flex format where it's 2 wide receivers, 2 flex spots, the earliest it can come is in round 8. And then in a traditional format, again, 2 wide receivers, 1 flex spot, the earliest you want to be drafting your 5th wide receiver is round 9. Personally, kind of going back to that 3 wide receiver, 1 flex league, I would have a little bit of a hard time taking that 5th wide receiver in round 5. Again, if you don't have the 3 wide receivers and 2 flex spots, unless the value is really, really strong, it grades out as fine to do. It grades out as increasing your championship rate. Personally, I would lean towards maybe not doing that. Do 4 in a row, grab a running back, quarterback, tight end to take that first bench player, even though you know you're going to use that player a lot because there are bye weeks, there are injuries, there are tough matchups. You're going to be rotating all those receivers in a lot. So having that high-end bench wide receiver, again, is still valuable to have. Personally, I don't think I would do it unless the value is really strong. But yeah, if you only have 2 starting wide receiver spots, your 5th wide receiver should be coming in rounds 8 through 12 if you have 2 flex spots, 9 through 12 if you have 1 flex spot. So you are waiting a little bit to grab that 5th wide receiver. So that's wide receiver, which again is the most important position in a full PPR league. But what does running back look like? In full PPR leagues, the first optimal round to draft a running back is round 3. That's a little bit surprising to me, but I guess we shouldn't be like shocked, right? Like we've had definitely some early round running backs hit in recent seasons, especially like Christian McCaffrey last season was on an incredible amount of playoff and championship teams. But wide receivers as a whole like have for sure been more stable. So unless you have been hitting on, a top 3, top 5 running back in these early rounds, it's just been easier to build a really strong team attacking wide receiver early on. So I guess we shouldn't be shocked to see this. There are differences among these different formats. And again, format here is 2 wide receivers, 3 wide receiver, 1 flex spot versus 2 flex spot, but not huge differences. And the differences, again, should make sense to us. The first round, again, for all of those formats is round 3 for that first running back. Where it changes is the last optimal round. So if you have 2 or 3 wide receivers and you have 1 flex spot, either one of those 2, your optimal range is round 3 through 6 for that first running back. It extends to round 3 through 7 if you add in another flex spot and have 2 wide receivers. And it's actually 3 through 8 if you have 3 wide receivers and 2 flex spots. So again, round 3 is a starting point. Then that last round where it's optimal to take that first running back really just depends on how extreme we're going towards wide receiver in the format. As we add in wide receiver spots, as we add in flex spots, it increases by a round for each. For your second running back, we're again looking at 2 wide receiver and 3 wide receiver leagues being the same. If there's only 1 flex spot, it is rounds 4 through 7 in both those formats. It extends to rounds 3 through 8 in 2 flex leagues, and then rounds 6 through 9 in 3 wide receiver, 2 flex leagues. There are 2 very important notes I want to make about this. 1, data is very clear. If you're in a 3 wide receiver, 2 flex league, you're going RB0 or maybe hero, but like you are drafting 1 running back at most early on, and you are just hammering the wide receiver position. Like there's truly just no need to invest early in running back. So just load up on a million wide receivers. You can go quarterback and go tight end, but like get a ton of wide receivers in that format. Other one, I know it's going to seem weird seeing, I said round 3 is optimal to draft your second running back in a 2 wide receiver, 2 flex league. But I said a second ago that the first optimal round for your first running back is round 3 as well for taking your first running back. So how can the first optimal round for your first running back be round 3, but also your second running back in round 3? Basically, what that means is that it's pretty close to even. Maybe it's like very slightly negative taking your first running back in round 2 in this format. So again, 2 wide receiver, 2 flex spots. Very, very close to even in round 2. And so teams that did go wide receiver, running back, still did very well overall, still had an above average championship rate. As long as they waited for that third running back, which I'll get to in a second. You don't want to take your third running back early. And I think that makes a lot of sense for this format, especially this season. Like in a 2 wide receiver, 2 flex league, you could technically start 4 running backs. And so by taking that second running back in round 3, it's not really hurting you that much. If you happen to hit later on, cool. You can start more running backs than expected. If you happen to not hit later on, even if you happen to kind of bust there, it was like, well, listen, I took a shot at running back. I do still need to start 2 of them every week, and I can still attack wide receiver in the middle rounds. Like you kind of lock in relatively decent draft capital at the position, and then you don't have to worry about missing out on it in the middle rounds. I think this build type just makes a lot of sense for full PPR leagues this season. There are some sick wide receivers in round 1, but I fully understand that running back really kind of drops off after we start to exit, especially round 3 and even getting into like the later third round. When we go into round 4, 5, 6, 7 at running back, it stinks, especially in full PPR leagues. And so we don't really want to be attacking running backs to those spots. And then you look at wide receiver, and like, again, I said, there's some awesome wide receivers in round 1, but let's be honest, like rounds 2, rounds 3, there's like basically just this huge tier of wide receiver that are all very similar. And to be honest, many of them aren't that much better than what we're getting in rounds 4, 5, and 6. But like I said, the running backs in rounds 4, 5, 6, they're certainly worse than what you're getting in rounds 2 or 3. So if you do start off with a wide receiver in round 1 this season, which again is optimal in all formats of full PPR, taking a running back in rounds 2, in rounds 3 before returning to wide receiver, it seems like a very good strategy this season. How long should you wait for your third running back though? In all formats of full PPR leagues, you're looking at rounds 6 through 9 as your optimal range, which means if you started off wide receiver, running back, you can wait until round 9 to draft your third running back, and that would still result in an optimal build. We also see very similar results across your 4th and your 5th running backs, irrespective of format. You're looking at rounds like 8 through 11 for your 4th running back, rounds 10 through 13 for running back 5. This again points to maybe attacking running back twice in rounds, let's say 2 through 4, exiting round 4 with 2 running backs before waiting, drafting other positions, and then returning in that like round 8 through 13 range where you start filling out your bench running backs. Then finally, quarterback, tight end. Truthfully, everything is on the table. Quarterback should come no earlier than round 3. So round 3 is the first time it grades out as optimal to take your first quarterback. But once round 3 hits, all bets are off. You can start taking your first quarterbacks in rounds 3 through 12. It is still optimal even if you took your first run in round 12. The data is also clear. If you do wait until double-digit rounds, you want to double dip at quarterback. So if you do spend that 12th round on a quarterback, take 2 of them. You can maybe extend that into rounds like 13, 14, if you're in one of those formats that has a lot more skill players starting. So for example, 3 wide receiver, 2 flex spots. There's a lot more positions that are starting in your lineup that are not quarterback. And so if you wanted to wait until rounds 13, round 14, double dip, that's also fine to do that there. Again, quarterback just holds less value in those formats. Same is true at tight end, but you have even more flexibility. So there are no round 1 tight ends, and I probably would not take a tight end round 2 as well this season. It's just so important for wide receiver running back. And in this season, there just isn't anyone that stands out. Like obviously Laporte, I think, is first. I think Kelsey's second. But I don't think you're taking either one of them in rounds 1 or 2 unless you're in tight end premium. But all rounds grade out fine for tight end. Applying that to this season, I stand behind wanting a top 11 quarterback and a top 7 tight end. It doesn't mean you need both of them. I would just ideally like to land at least one of them. And ideally, I would like to land both, but you're not going to lose because you happen to not get both a top 11 and a top 7 tight end. I really just would try and prioritize at least getting one of them. Which one is entirely up to you. Honestly, it all comes down to value. If you see one of these players falling a lot, take them. My favorite quarterbacks are Mahomes, Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray, and Jordan Love. If you happen to miss out on those top 11, there's no good values, that's fine. My favorites are Goff, Cousins, Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, and Bo Nix. Although Geno Smith, Bo Nix, I would say more super flex options. If I'm drafting, especially anyone on that list, I want to be drafting 2 of them. And I wouldn't want it to be like Bo Nix is my first quarterback. Like I would definitely like him to be my second quarterback. And again, preferably in Superflex. At tight end, I like all of the top 7. Any one of them is fine. Again, comes down to value. If one of them happens to fall half a round, a full round, capitalize on that. Take them. If you do happen to miss out on those top 7, I still like Ferguson, still like David Njoku. Behind them, it would be Musgrave, Conklin, Noah Fant, Jonnu Smith, and Colby Parkinson. But I would definitely say after Ferguson and Njoku, you better be double dipping. Like I don't want to, like I like the upside of Musgrave, but take Musgrave and Conklin. Take like Conklin and Jonnu Smith. Like take 2 from this list because you need to understand that like the actual chances of hitting on a late round tight end are still extraordinarily low. And the odds that you hit on someone who finishes like top 5, top 7 is very, very slim. And so you want to be taking 2, giving yourself 2 upside chances because you also don't need those later rounds. If you waited on tight end, you spent a lot more picks at, running backs at wide receiver early on. You don't need as many shots at running back and receiver later because you haven't spent an early one at tight end. So you had that pick to already have drafted that running back wide receiver. So spend the 2 picks late. Again, it's really double digit rounds. Like if you're in the double digit rounds for tight end quarterback, I would probably double dip. If you did it for both of them, again, it's fine double dipping because you spent so many picks. You spent, 9 picks at running back and wide receiver. You don't need as many backups for those spots. So I hope that was helpful to all of you in full PPR leagues. Again, I have an app with very easy to understand graphics on the website where you can look at your specific format, see what position you want to be looking at, and it'll show you the optimal rounds you should be drafting them in. Personally, what I would do, I would just save these images to your phone or something, whether you have an in-person draft, an online draft, whatever it is. Go to your format that you're actually drafting in, save those images to your phone, and pull them up. Just make sure you're not being too aggressive or abandoning a position for a little bit too long, especially at running back and wide receiver. So I'll be back tomorrow with another player breakdown, Friday with the half PPR version of this video, and then Saturday to go over the latest news of the last week. Be sure to leave a like if you watched this far, you at least somewhat liked the video, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any more free content. That, my friends, is the end of this one, and thanks for watching.